Good morning.
Good morning. I went to sleep late. I'm tired.
I did too, but I'm not tired. I'm good for now until I need a nap at like 10.
This topic is spicy, and I have a lot of hesitation this morning to this, but that's okay.
Can't say I feel the same.
Yeah.
I had a feeling we were going to talk about this today.
Did you?
Yeah,
Why do you say that?
because it just seemed like the natural progression next podcast. And based off our list of topics, we're running out of topics.
Topics that we had said, hey, let's just jump into.
We chose like 10 topics. And we're like, let's start with these.
And today is infidelity. Dun dun dun.
So, yeah, similar to the last podcast, you may or may not want your kids to listen to this. So throw on some headphones or listen on your private time. And that is as far as the warning is it's gonna go.
Still take me back to the very beginning.
I mean, it started in Edinburgh, Indiana. That's the very beginning. Which was that the beginning we were talking about? I guess. I mean, we met in Edinburgh, Indiana. We were training to go on a deployment to Afghanistan. And very quickly, we started talking and things got serious fast. We got deployed to Afghanistan. And I would say, well, we were out there, the ratio of men to women are very lopsided. Way more men than women. If I had to say, it's usually like a woman to every 10 men. So it's kind of like scavengers, hungry scavengers, predators preying on women. And I say this in the lightest terms, but sometimes it's not fun. But you know, you're not supposed to have sex or have, sexual relations with people in these environments. And now people are being deprived of that. And then you stick us middle of a foreign country, and next thing you know, like everybody's just fucking their neighbor. But anyway, uh, because of that, I think that there was a lot of, I don't know, maybe you want to speak on how you felt, but for me, like I felt like you were very jealous of any interactions I was having with any other males. Um, Always thinking that something was going on, and maybe I'm wrong. I don't know. Where were you at that time?
Yeah, I uh, I I experienced a lot of trauma in this department. A lot of all of my relationships, it um ended ended by the woman, and it ended by her cheating on me.
I didn't know it was every single one.
Everyone that, yeah, that I was in a relationship with.
Yeah, I didn't know that.
I take that back.
Was it you?
That wasn't me. And so, as I didn't have much of a healthy relationship to go off on what that looks like. And I also was very traumatized by my prior relationships, doing no work. So I never witnessed, you know, people uh, in relationship after having a sexual relationship. I say all this for a few reasons, but and then also just, yeah, there was a jealousy factor of like that this might go, like I was scared that it wasn't gonna it was gonna pan out every other way.
But I had to say the first time we had a bit of an argument about this was a month into us knowing each other. And it was when you went back to San Diego and you met up with an ex, or she picked you up from the airport, whatever it was. And I just remembered because you used to make such a big deal about me talking to anyone from my past. And then you went back home and had that person pick you up from the airport. And I'm like, hold on. I was like, so this is a one-way highway. I was like, so I can't do these things, but you can. And I remember we had an argument. And it wasn't, I never thought he actually did anything. But at the time, it was, it was just immaturity, it was pettiness, and it was just like, well, if I can't do it, you can't either kind of argument for me. Uh, I've never been a like huge on like super jealous person. I wouldn't say I am. Um, and once again, I didn't think he actually did anything. It was more like, well, if you're gonna call me out on this shit, I'm gonna call you out too, kind of thing. And I think that was like the first time that we had an argument about that.
Yeah, I do remember this, and I my biggest the reason why it was like really saying, "Hey, this is okay," is because I was never in a relationship with her. It was more of a sexual thing, and so yeah. But I get now that Giselle says all that, and I look back at it, it definitely I see where she's coming from. But I was very defensive because of that. I'm like, I've never been in a relationship with her, and I was stuck on being right in that sense. But I digress on that.
Yeah. And then while we were in Afghanistan, there was a older man who I don't remember how I met him, how we started talking. And I think I really don't remember how this all started, but I know that at one point he said, "Hey, like I have some alcohol. Do you want to come over to my room to drink?" And I honestly didn't have any intentions of doing anything with this man. Like he reminded me of like a dad figure. Like he was way older than me, was not attractive. I wanted nothing to do with him. But at the time, like I was very stressed out over there. And I was like, you know what? Drinking sounds great right now. And I was like, sure. And I went over to his room and we had some shots. And the moment he touched my hand, I was like, I'm getting the fuck out of here. And I left. But when I come out and I look at my phone, like I have a bunch of angry text messages from Alex and phone calls. And he finally like finds me and he's like really mad and he's like, I've been looking for you everywhere. Like, where the fuck have you been? And I had ignored him that night because I don't know if you remember more, but like I think he knew that I was talking to this guy and I was gonna end up over there or something. And I ended up ignoring him because I'm like, you're like up my ass, like leave me alone.
So we
Yeah.
yeah, I did know. We talked a little bit about it, and I was like, "You're not gonna go, right?" And she was like, "I don't know. I don't think so." And that night, I had the late watch at the tower, and so she was like, "I'm probably just gonna do my laundry and go to sleep." And so I was like, "Okay," and then I'm gonna go to sleep. And I don't know why I woke up, but I woke up and I went to go just talk to her. We lived right across the hall, and she wasn't there. And I, started texting her, and I felt like I knew I felt like she had went. And then, yeah, I let my insecurity, a lot of the stories that I created in my head, I let that get to me, and so I was sending texts and like, "Hey, what the hell? Like, where you at?" And I went. There was this deck on the far end of our barracks. We were on the second floor. There's this deck area, and I just sat there, and I was like so frustrated, and I started to like tear up and cry, and I was just like, why am I here again? Like I kept saying like, why am I here? I got back to this place, and as I was sitting there, I saw her walk out of the door, the guy's room, and I just like so much anger and consumed me, and very not beneficial for me at that moment. Like when I say at that moment, um, I went right back to every other spot that I was. I thought she cheated. I thought she fucked him. I thought she I created that story.
Yeah. And I remember it took like he never believed me. Even like years later, he would keep asking, like, did you really not do anything with that guy? And I'm like, do you really think that I did something? But he honestly, like, all he did, like, the moment he put his hand on my hand, I was like, peace, that's my sign to get the fuck out of here. And I left. Um, but I think that was like our first big fight about that. And I recognized it was a very like unhealthy dynamic. And at the same time, I was just like, oh, like this is how relationships are. Like this is what happens. Like people are jealous of each other and you argue and you fight and then you kiss and make up and it's all fine. So anyhow, that I think that was all that happened that first year there. And then I got back to the States from Afghanistan, and I remember I started hanging out with old friends. Um, and he had a big issue with that. Like some of them were male friends. Nothing ever happened, but he never believed me about those things. And it was like this constant thing of me like having to like explain myself and constantly like I'm not doing anything. I'm not doing like just because I hang out with a guy doesn't mean I'm fucking him. Like I'm not doing that. Um
I do remember that I had a really big, like the second big issue that I had was that you stayed the night at a guy's house. Um, well, I don't think you intentionally stayed the night, but you fell asleep.
yeah, I got high.
Yeah.
That's what it was. I got high. And since I hadn't smoked in a really long time, I passed out and I was tired. But I woke up at like 4 in the morning and I was like, what the fuck? And I was like, okay, I'm going home. But I literally fell asleep on the couch, woke back up, and I left.
And so like I got like that really bothered me for a long time. And I didn't know she recently opened up about that, but like I didn't know um I felt like there was something there too. So like those two instances were like in the early part of our marriage, that was all within the first, not marriage, our relationship. I was in within like the first year, like had me really, the trust wasn't there. Like I just have to call it what it was. Is like I wanted to feel like the trust was there, but like the trust wasn't there.
Yeah, and I mean, trust for you at that time meant I wasn't allowed to talk to any guys or interact with any other guy
Yeah.
without your presence or supervision. And I wasn't okay with that because I was like, I'm allowed to have male friends and talk to guys, which granted, I didn't have a healthy relationship with that either at the time. That's something, I've heard a lot about now, like learn how to be friends with male. Like most people don't know, like it's just natural that, females and males kind of want to be with each other or get with each other. I'm not saying this is in every single situation, but there's always like this place that you reach in certain relationships where people don't know how to like draw the line of this is a friendship, I'm not pursuing you kind of thing. And I definitely at that time, even if I knew a guy was pursuing me, like my thought process was, well, I'm not interested, so we can still be friends. And now I know better, like a line has to be drawn, or at least those words have to be said so the other party knows that. Because for a lot of guys, they just, like for them, it's like, oh, she's still talking to me. Clearly she's interested. And it's like, yeah, no, that's not always the case. And like I said, I was young, dumb, didn't know this. But as I've gotten older, I realized like some guys do need that to be said out loud. And, it wasn't something I would say that to some guys, like everyone knew we were in a relationship and all of that. Like that was very clear, but I never said like I'm not interested in your pursuits. Like I'm here as a friend. Um, but anyhow, I think the next big thing that I remember having an argument was probably when I was around like 3 or 4 months pregnant with Grayson. Um, and I think he was drunk, can't remember. And I don't know what we were arguing about, and he's like, I don't think that's my child. And that's when I was like, okay, fuck this. Like this has nothing to do with me. And I told him that. I said, look, like all your childhood trauma and all your shit, like you're not gonna put that on me. And I was like, I'm not your mom, like I'm not your exes, I'm not whatever it is that's going on inside of you. But I was like, that's not me. Like, if you think this is not your child, then we have no reason to be together. I said, like, we can break this off right now. But I was like, I'm not doing this. Like, I'm not gonna live with you blaming me and guilting me every day of my life, telling me that I'm constantly cheating on you. Like, I'm not doing it. Um, I don't know if you.
Yeah, I do remember that. And it was late at night too. And we were screaming at each other. It was very unhealthy. And I do remember her saying that. And I also remember like to myself, like I don't have that. I don't have that trauma. Like I'm not. I knew that like things in my childhood had happened, but I'm like, that's not. I'm not looking into that. I'm not doing that. And I don't think we like kissed and made up right then, but it was more of like a cooling period. And like the next day, or the next afternoon, because I worked in the morning, we were okay. And I'm like, okay, like it's like pushing it under the rug. Like if you don't take care of it, you don't sweep it, and you just keep pushing stuff under the rug, eventually the rug's not going to be able to carry or cover what you're keeping under it, and it's going to flow out. And then it's just a mess at that point. And for me, I was just pushing everything under the rug. And she had shown me so much interest. She was so interested in me that I was like, oh man, this is the one. And by no means did I not have any second guesses on that. But now sitting back on it, I realized not only did I feel like she was the one, she also is like brought a lot of light to shit that makes me uncomfortable too. So
Yeah, and I think a bit before that, like shortly after I got back from Afghanistan, I remember, because all of this had been going on now for a year and we were having the same arguments. I remember asking him to just open up the relationship. And I was like, if this is such a big deal, let's just open up the relationship. And then because in my head, I knew nothing about open relationships or healthy relationships in general. In my head, I was like, well, if it's an open relationship, then there will be no arguments about who I talk to. And
were you sure it was that early? I thought it was
yes,
in Italy when you first.
no, I remember having a conversation in our first apartment about this.
Okay.
And
I don't remember.
I do. And I remember he was like, no, like that's not an option. Like we're not doing that. And I was like, well, then I guess you're just gonna have to, come to terms that I talk to guys and I talk to girls. And because I used to tell him all the time, like, I've always talked to guys throughout high school, like rarely had any girlfriends, rarely hung out with the girls. I usually hung out with guys and I usually spoke with guys. And that was just what I was used to. And once again, it comes back to, all the things we hear growing up, like females are just going to screw you over and don't be friends with girls and like all these things. And I mean, I had my sisters and I was like, that's enough girls. Like, I don't need more girls in my life. So I usually was friends with guys. Like I had a few girlfriends and things like that, but even after a few, like I didn't have like a best friend throughout my whole entire high school time. Like I had a friend here, and then the next year would be somebody else, and then nobody. And then towards the end of my high school years, I was pretty much to myself, and I had a boyfriend, and I worked a lot, and I was in sports, and I just kind of kept to myself after that. So
Yeah, so I mean, a lot of cracked foundation on my part at the very beginning. I mean, I'm not taking 100% by any means, but I had a lot of work that I should have. I don't want to use the term should. A lot
we
of work.
were unaware.
Yeah, a
That's
lot
all
of
it was. Like it was unawareness on both ends. Like I said, I didn't know what a healthy relationship was either. So I didn't know how to have these conversations. I didn't know where to draw the line, what was right, what was wrong, and how to just talk about it.
Yeah, I was.
And
Go ahead.
go ahead.
I was big happy wife, happy life at that time. So like I was honestly just trying to please her. Like, okay, there's rift. and I would suppress my own feelings. I wouldn't even sit with them. I knew they were there, and I was angry, and it would affect me. And I would, every time she's like, "Hey, what's wrong?" I'd be like, "Nothing, nothing." And I would run away from them, and I would ask her like, "Hey, like, how can I help? Like, what's wrong? Like, how can I be of service?" And when she would tell me, I'd close down because it was about me. I didn't know how to handle that stuff, and it was just like this cycle. And the happy wife, happy life. I was really striving for that. If she wasn't vocalizing what was going on with her, I felt like everything was good. If we were having sex, the food was on the table, and she wasn't like vocalizing what was going on. I felt like everything was good.
Yeah, and kind of jumping forward to recently, that was why I wanted a separation, because I realized for Alex and maybe a lot of men, it's like if they're having sexual relationship with you, if you're still taking care of their needs, everything's fine. Like even though everything's a shit and everything's mess, like everything's fine in their head. And that's why I was like, there has to be that clear separation of like, look, things are not fine and we need to work on this. And it doesn't have to mean that it leads to divorce, but it's just drawing the line of like, this is enough, this is a boundary, and we cannot keep doing this if things are not okay and we need to work on them. So I'm going to fast forward and then we're kind of going to jump back in the timeline. So this was what, 2022? Yeah. So last summer. It was in the summer?
Mm.
I think so.
Are we talking about August 4th? I don't know what we're talking about.
I'm not talking about that. But anyways, so after Alex started doing the work and stuff, I started considering opening up about a lot of things that I did throughout our marriage that I never told him. And part of that reason being, in the past, anytime I was like, oh, should I tell him this? I knew it would just end up in an argument. Like we were just going to argue and we weren't really going to solve anything. So I never told him anything. And I'll get into the details of what. So as he's, in his men's group and he's doing the work, and now, he knows many men's stories and things like that. I started considering, telling him these things. And I remember one day I don't know what it was, or I honestly, I don't remember if we were having a conversation, if I just called you over or what, but we were already living in the RV. And I said, like, I have some things I want to tell you. And he's like, what? And part of me felt guilty because I felt like I made him feel crazy a lot of times. Or, like I was doing something and I would lie to him and I'd be like, you're just making a big deal out of this, like nothing's happening kind of thing. And, after we got back together from the separation, like my thought process is like, if this relationship is going to work, if we're going to build a solid foundation, it has to be built on trust and honesty, and everything has to come out now. Like there's no point in holding on to these lies and things for another decade. So with kind of that thought process in mind, I called him over one day and I said, like I have some things I have to tell you. And it was like I had been talking to this guy that I met when I was like in boot camp when I was like 19 years old. And I had been talking to him off and on throughout the years. We never did anything. Like we never even kissed, like nothing physically ever happened. But we liked each other back in the day in boot camp. And so during my time in it wasn't even boot camp, it was AIT. Oh yeah, it was the training after my boot camp. I had an interest in this guy and I liked him, but nothing ever happened because he was like super Christian, like he wouldn't even like kiss a girl, nothing, all this stuff. But throughout the years, we stayed in contact, and mostly because I just wanted to know like his whereabouts, like how his life was going and whatnot. But as time went on and we were having a lot of issues, like that turned into the person that I would talk to a lot about these things. And he just made me feel better about everything that was going on. And, and basically like it became to be more like a deeper emotional attachment kind of thing. And, I would talk to him off and on throughout the years. It was never like consistent, but he would sometimes like see the messages or emails and things like that. And I would always like, oh no, like nothing's going on. Like I'm not talking to that guy or whatever the case may be. And I remember it wasn't until Italy that I was like, you just don't get how I talk to him. Like I can never talk to you like that. And he was like, well, I'm gonna try. Like I'm gonna be that for you. And he's like, watch, I'm gonna be able to have these conversations with you. And I remember like the next day he's like forcing you don't cut the YouTube, do you?
I will do this for you.
Yeah. So we were in Italy, and I remember the next day he tried to have one of these conversations with me. And it was, I was really getting into like spirituality and what that meant for me. And a lot of the conversations that I would have with this guy were about that. So he used to be Christian and then he converted to Jewish. So it was, conversations about like how do you get there, like things about reincarnation and like all these other things. And whenever I try to like talk to Alex about this, his replies were always like, oh yeah, uh-huh. Like there was never a conversation. So I was like, you see, like I can't have these conversations with you because you don't even get this stuff. So anyhow, that was like one of the main reasons why I would even talk with this guy and reach out. And almost always it was during like a low point for us when we were like arguing or we weren't on good terms. Like that was where I would go and reach out and just talk to this guy. And at times it was inappropriate. Like we were crossing boundaries. It wasn't just um like an emotional thing. Like he would tell me that he desired me and I would say the same to him and all these things. And later on we ended up meeting up like 3 times, but it was always in public. And by then I had kids, so sometimes I even had my kids with me. Like it was never in public, but we met up I think twice after, like, years later. So I told some of this to Alex, but I didn't tell him everything. There had been other things that had happened in the past when we still lived in California and I was in the army and I would go away for drill on weekends. And at that moment I remember thinking like I can only say so much and like let him process that before I say more. So, at the time he asked me like, "Oh, is there more?" And I was like, "No." I don't know if
Yeah,
you want
yeah, I'll take over for a minute if you're like dying over there. Yeah, I'm the guy that she had met in A school or AIT, and that relationship that was really and still is like a subject. I realized that there's things like anger and sadness that come up as I listen, but I also go back to those times and I sit there and I see that my like I didn't know how to connect deeper. Like I wanted to, I really did. I think that's a big when I think about this now is like integrity and like your thoughts matching your words and your words matching your actions. And like my thoughts and my words were somewhat aligned because my thoughts were like, I need to do this to keep my wife. I wasn't doing it for myself. Like it wasn't like, oh, I need to do like I want to do this for myself. It's like I want to keep my wife. And I would say it and then like I'd start to feel it like I do want to do this. I want to be able to have these deeper conversations. I didn't know how. I didn't know what that looked like. And like when I went like the textbook approach, I remember that conversation where she started to say like, hey, like I'm talking to this guy, after I saw the messages, like I'm talking to this guy because I can have these conversations with him. I can't have these conversations with you. And I'm like, yeah, but you're crossing the boundary with like all the everything else like the sexual comments and things of that nature. Like you're crossing the boundary. And I couldn't I couldn't see the deepening message of this all. Like I couldn't. I didn't see that she just wanted to be able to connect deeper. She wanted to be able to open up. I was very reactive at that point in our relationship. I we were in Italy, and a lot of how I was handling that was I was working. I was making work for myself, and I was staying at work, running away from this. I was running away from her. I was running away from the kids, and the reason why I know this is because I was in the job I was at. We taught we taught 4 times a year, and I was trying to teach double that, triple that, and I was heavily involved in the base and doing things, and
He also could make his own work schedule,
I could make my
and
own work schedule.
he would work super late for no reason.
And a lot of times, and I've told Giselle this in the past, is like I'd be sitting in the office. I just sit in the office
Yeah.
and dreading to come home, but not knowing why I'm dreading to come home. Because she cooked, she cleaned, she took care of the kids. Like what I perceived as perfect was perfect, except that I didn't want to go back to reality with that. And this back and forth conversation with this gentleman, it really, it was like I started to feel the trust thing come back up from early on in our relationship, and the other points, the other situation we talked about, those two were like really big, lingering in my it took a lot of space up in my head. And when she was doing this, I'm like, she had to be doing that. Like she had to have had sex with that guy. She had to had sex with the guy that she stayed the night at his house. Like I started to create these stories, and it was making more resentment. And there was many times where I felt like she was asking for too much. Like she was asking for too much of me, and I didn't want to be present for that.
Yeah, and then it was like a couple of weeks after that, not even, maybe a week or two. I was like, when you asked me there was more, I said there is more.
And you're talking about last year,
Yeah.
2022. Yeah.
I was like, there is more that I have to tell you. And I was like, I want to tell you everything now because I just want to get it out. And he had asked me like, why are you telling me this now? And the first time, and I had told him like I couldn't have this conversation with you without us yelling and screaming at each other a few years ago. I was like, but now we're at a place like we can have this conversation. So the second time I told him everything. And like when I was still in the army and the reserves, and we would go out on weekends, like there was times that I went out dancing with the guys, and I danced inappropriately. Like, I got to the point of like almost making out with a guy, but I never did. Like I backed off and I was like, no, like I don't want to do this. And I don't know, like something inside of me, I knew who Alex was. And part of me, it was like this innocence to him. Like I could almost see like he didn't even know what was going on. And I was like, if I do this, like I'm gonna cross that line and there's no coming back from it. Like I'm gonna break him essentially. And I was like, I don't want to be the person to break him in that way. Um, so there was always a part of me like I truly did care and love him, and I didn't want to hurt him in that way. But there was like the part of me that was hurting, that ached for that connection with other people, and I kept searching for it. But I knew, at the same time, like it wasn't necessarily the answer. Like in that moment, oh yeah, it feels good, and you're like, this is exactly what I need. And then there was like that other side, like the other voice in my head, like this isn't the answer. Like this isn't going to fix your problems. Like things aren't going to be better tomorrow if you do this. So because of that, I never went through with anything. Like I would talk to these guys or, go out and dance and this and that, but I never did anything with any of them. So I told him about all of that. There had been another incident with another guy that I was talking to too. told him about that. And, it was that was kind of like the start of unlayering this relationship trauma, because this happened, you know, with both of us after we had gotten together, and like slowly peeling back the layer to see what was the true core issue. Like we knew there was a lack of connection, but there was other things there too. Like why did I continue doing this, throughout the years? And I think it was a few weeks after that there was a huge breakthrough for us, and like the truth was revealed, and it was because we slowly were like taking steps in the right direction of what this all meant for us, for our relationship, and for each other as individuals.
Yeah. I remember, it's crazy. I actually remember specific dates. May 5th, uh, of 2022. We were here in this current campground that we're at, a few rows all the way, to the back. And the kids had her phone and they had opened something, and I saw messages, or I saw this phone number, and I'm like, who is this? So I started messaging this person because I still had, uh, even until May, like we made a lot of breakthroughs. It, from November of or October of 2021, like yeah, we made progress, but I did feel like there was still like some trust for myself. Like I had to figure out why I was still having some trust issues. And now that I look back, because she didn't open up, she wasn't like fully open, lean forward at that moment. And I knew that if we were going to take a step in our relationship, we had to clear the past. Like we had to get in front of the past. And so I see this app. It's a wire app. It's I Google what it is, because I don't have no clue what it is, and it's like it's a hide private chat app. And so I'm sending this person messages, and they're like, oh yeah, I'm in Brooklyn and all this other stuff, and I say, hey, give me a call. And nothing. And I said, like, my husband's not around, give me a call. I was acting like her. Long story short, he never told me, the person never told me who they were. But it was taking too much space in my fucking head. Like one thing that I look back on, I had so much space in my head around insecurity and around what she was doing and checking her phone often, even when she wouldn't know, and finding these things. And like I'm not to like pull it back even further, but like this was the same guy that I've talked about many times, of like seeing in 2017 of I found a naked picture of him, and I'm like, fuck, why does he keep coming up in my life? Like I'm sitting here with so much anger. Why is he coming up in my life?
I don't think he was naked. He was in shorts.
Boxers, yeah.
Yeah, I never got nudes.
He was in boxers. And so I'm like so angry at this time. And so she was like a little frustrated, but at this time in May, she was a little frustrated, but she was like, it's this person. And I'm like,
And by now, like I wasn't having the same conversations with him as I was in the past. And that's one thing, like like throughout the years, as things were getting better between us, I was like, hey, like I'm not willing to talk to you like this anymore. Like we can talk, like, hey, what's up? How's it going? But I was like, I'm not like crossing that line with you. And like he would still try, but I was like, I just wouldn't engage. I was like,
yeah.
I'm not crossing that line.
And so she told me. And so at that time I tried to have, I don't know, let her speak on how I showed up in that moment, but I tried to be very calm and be more curious of everything, and asking why a lot. And I do remember going back, and it was more of like a point of validation for me. I say validation, but like reaffirmation of, hey, like, so back in 2017 when this all happened, like, tell me, was that it? And she's let some layers out. She was like, no, I did send pictures too. And it fucking punched me in the stomach. I remember that was the first test for me. And I said, like, am I going to allow the progress that we've made, that I've made in the last 4 or 5 months, be ruined by something that happened almost 6 years ago or 5 years ago, whenever it was. And I sat with that. Like, that was my sticking point. And then I do remember she did let a little bit more out, and that was hurting. That was hurtful too. But that was my sticking point. Was this was all 6-7 years ago, when I wasn't even in that space to be able to provide her the connection. And I'm not validating what she did, right? Like, what she did was, like,
No, and same for me. Like, I don't think that excuses anyone. Like, I knew it was wrong and I still did it. I guess for us, we're having these conversations more to shed light of when these behaviors are happening in relationships. Like, there's usually a deeper cause or a deeper reason. So instead of scratching the surface, like, really go beneath and see what's really there. Like, so often you hear people in marriages like, oh, I don't want to have sex with my wife, or I don't want to have sex with my husband, or I'm just not that interested, or things are boring, or this. It's really a lack of connection, a lack of deepening in the relationship. And it's like, how do you get to those places? And you have to be able to open up fully and be vulnerable and be like all in, all there. And that means them knowing when you're having a bad day at work, them knowing that you don't want to come home and you don't know why, and being able to have those conversations without anyone blaming anyone, without anyone feeling bad, without anyone thinking that, you know, it's their fault, kind of thing. But like he said, at the time, I don't think either of us could have had those conversations. Like, if he came home and he said, I never want to come home and I don't know why, I would have been like, oh, fuck you. Like,
yeah.
what do you mean by that? I like, there's no way I would have known how to have that conversation, 8 years ago.
And I want to
So
say that, like, yes, some people aren't compatible and divorce is an
yeah.
option. And I'm not saying that divorce is not an option, but it comes down to, and I'm reading a book that Jessylandalex read, 15 Commitments of Conscious Leadership, and it talks about the word commitment. And it says the way that we use commitment, we use it loosely. And that, are you committed to the results? That's the big piece. Are you committed to the results? You can be committed to losing weight, but are you committed to the results? If you're committed to losing weight, are you eating healthy? Are you exercising? Are you doing the things that are showing that the scale's going down? And so, for that point, like, for people that may be experiencing this, and just like what we went through, are you committed to doing that work and going deeper with your significant other? Because oftentimes it's easier to leave, and and oftentimes the best option is to leave, by all means. But where I'm going with this is that you have to commit and prioritize doing that. And we weren't there, and we didn't know it. And so, going back, like, when she opened up in May, like, there was a little bit there, and I saw a little growth, but that also triggered a lot of shit internally. And fortunately, like, I had a men's group that I relied on heavily, and I called many men, crying and screaming and just like, hey, can I just get it out? Like, I just need to get it out. And the topic at this time, right after all that, like, we had another conversation about monogamy and non-monogamy, and that was like, punched me in the stomach. And she was like, this is a big reason why I wanted to open up the relationship, is because like, it's unrealistic of you, like, me not being able to talk to any man. And that was the first time where I was able to say, my boundary of that is pretty unhealthy. It's based off of unhealthy fear, and it's based off um, of trauma. And boundaries, healthy boundaries, are boundaries that can be flexible, boundaries that, when like, for me, as I've been able to do this work, pull down, pull back, like, I can start to trust, give that opportunity, and for her to get closer. And so, in May, when that happened, she did let some things out, and I did ask, is there more? And she was like, no. And so, when this came back up in the end of July, early August, and she started saying more, I can tell you that I remember once again, we're on the bed, the couch, the dinette that we're on, it was a bed, and we're in Colorado. She says, "Hey, I need to talk to you. I need to tell you some stuff." And I honestly thought she was gonna like the worst of it. I thought the worst of it. And when she had told me just more in depth a little bit, like, "Hey, I met this guy multiple times in person, and this," um, I think I said,
That's it.
"That's it,"
Yeah.
because I had already created this story that like it
He's
was.
like, so you didn't fuck anybody? I'm like, no.
And like I said, there's a lot of hurt that I felt and still process and still understand about the things that she's done. But uh, like I'm by no means am I saying, you know, like for some people, like the emotional connection piece is bigger than the physical. And so where I'm going with that is that like I just was like, that's it. And I did have questions at that moment. I didn't have them formulated in my head. And she allowed me the opportunity to ask her questions the following few days. And I would get emotional. Like I remember a couple times asking her, "Hey, like what about this and what about that?" Um, and what I realized at that moment was doing this work, when you suppress something, it comes out sideways. And I was suppressing a lot of things for her. Like I was trying to control a lot of things for her. And then I was also suppressing a lot of shit myself. And they were coming out sideways for these bids of connection. And I didn't know that.
I mean, and I could speak for myself. Like growing up, I don't think we knew of any real healthy relationships. Like my dad cheated on my mom for years, and I have memories of that. And like them arguing, us going out in the middle of the night to see, like find him, like all this stuff. Um, in my culture, like my parents are Dominican, and Dominican culture, like the machismo and the men cheating, the men having, three, four baby mamas, like it's very common. And in high school, like this stuff happened too all the time. The only other like serious boyfriend I had during high school, like we both cheated on each other all the time. And it's like I didn't really have like this is what a healthy relationship looks like. Like this is what love looks like. So there was also like that part of me where I knew it was wrong and I knew it was right, but in my head I was like, does that even exist? And for a long time I didn't think it did. For a long time I was like, that doesn't really exist. People aren't really like that. Uh, and it took me, like leaving where I grew up and experiencing other parts of the world and seeing other relationships and other people and like, oh, this does exist. Like this is possible. So there's also like that whole programming having to shed those layers of this is all I've known my whole life. That, you come together in a relationship not knowing what's true baseline. So you start building on the foundation you've had your whole life. So it was really us breaking down the foundations we had as kids, as young adults in our dating world and everything. And again, it's not that you don't know wrong from right. It's almost like you don't even know what right looks like or how to do it. So
Yeah, and there's this big expectation that we do, like everyone,
yeah.
like we know what we're doing. And when there's not this there was not this normalization of like talking about it. Like, and even like it goes into sexual encounters is like, what does real sex look like? And that was a big piece. What was keeping me attached for a long time was that we were still having sex. And my thought of sex was like, she comes and I come, we're good. Like, and so that was like my biggest thing was like and it wasn't even like a connecting, um, it wasn't a connecting sexual experience. It was more of like, okay, this is how I know that she can get off. Let me just do that, and then let me get off, and then we're good. And I felt like the relationship was good. And then as these layers had shed, we hit a whole different piece, like sexually, like things like that we've never experienced in our relationship. that I never experienced in my sexual relationships. I don't know if like I can't speak on her, but like it took a different, it went a level deeper, and I'm like, holy shit, this is what I've been looking for. This has been what I've been wanting. And the funny thing is, it's all about being able to just hold the space. Like, why? And I started to beat myself up a little bit, and I had to come back to and say, Alex, you weren't where you needed. Like, that wasn't your journey. You're on the path. You're where you need to be with who you're supposed to be and where you're supposed to be at. And so,
I mean, you don't know what you don't know. You
yeah.
can't beat yourself up about what you don't know.
And so, like, as like, for me, and this is a big piece, and I've been watching a lot of men lately talk about this, and I'm starting to get happy that men are talking about like the shame and things around sex, because like a lot of my safety and security was like, I'm having sex with her. And even though like she was, like looking outside emotionally, I was still tied to the fact that we were having sex and we were in Italy, and this guy was across the country, whatever. And so like it was still a fear-based thing, right? I was really driven by that. But as we this last year, unraveling it, it just took a different meaning for me, like a different level. And yeah, don't get me wrong, like there's times that we still have to have like these quick, like, sex sessions. And I know this isn't the topic of it, but there is a lot more where we're deeply connecting, where we're having these sessions that like it's just a different level. What is it? What does Kim and Ami say? Soul scratching sex. Like it's a different type of sex. And
We're not scratching, no. I don't think that's what she says. But
anyways,
don't quote him on
I'll
that.
delete this off the podcast.
She does not say soul scratching. I think it's like the soul food versus junk food kind of concept. But anyhow. But in August was when things really broke open with us, and this was like late at night, and I was just laying in bed and we're just talking, and mostly I was processing my own thoughts and everything we had that had happened between us out loud with him. And I said, one question, because he kept asking me like, well, why do you want to open up the relationship, and like, why did you do all these things? And I kept telling him like, it's not because I'm physically attracted to these guys, in a sense. Like I think I even told him like, I wouldn't even, like I would never seriously date some of these guys. Like I just wouldn't. Like they're not my type, that kind of thing. Because he was like, well, he was always like, well, do you want a relationship with them? Like, you want to go fuck them? Like, what is it? And I was like, honestly, it's not even that. Like, I don't even care to touch some of these guys. And I was like, some of them, I don't even think they're that attractive. Like, all this stuff. And so I'm sitting there like, why am I doing this? Like, why have I done this? Like, what is it about these guys that keeps me coming back? And I know that the answer wasn't outside of me, the answer was within me. And that's when I started making the connections of like, well, obviously I wanted an emotional connection to you. Like there was just a lack of, because there's a lack of an emotional connection, the physical connection doesn't feel deepening. It's like very surface level. And I was like, I know I wanted to go deeper, but I myself didn't even know how to achieve that. And I'm here just like going through my head, and what I realized is, for a long time, like the first half of our marriage, sex was pretty much about him coming, and it felt very like, I'm here to get what I want, and that's it. And like after that, turn around, go to sleep, and good night. And I felt discarded, like I felt used, like I was just a receptacle. Like I was there, all right, he did his thing and done. And to me, like there was no worse feeling than feeling that. And I remember that there was times where I would be like, I don't want to, I don't want to. And there was always like this big pressure of like, but like, come on, yes, you do. And I want to, and I want to. And I remember of one instance where I kept saying like, like I really don't want to. And he never physically like forced himself on me, but it was like this pressure of like, this is what happens. Like you're the wife, this is what you do. And I remember that he was like doggy style behind me. He like he was like, yeah, like I was just laying there. I was like, fine. I was like, whatever. And I just laid there and I had like tears coming out my eyes and he had no idea. And he literally like finished and leaves. Because he used to come home from work a lot during our first like few years. And I remember this was at our first apartment. Like he came home, did that, and just left. And I'm like, what the fuck just happened? Like you just came home literally to bend me over a bed, fuck me, and go back to work. And it was just like this feeling of being raped, for a long time. But I told him, I think that that's a huge part of me looking for these other guys. Like what I'm really looking for is a safe connection where I don't feel violated, where I don't feel like these guys are crossing a boundary, where my no means no, and I don't need to say it more than once. And that like just blew shit, open for us because it was a realization that I never had. And like I said, this happened like early or in our marriage. So it hadn't happened in years because of a bigger situation that happened that I drew the line and I was like, okay, this is my fucking boundary. Like, I'm not doing this. Uh, but it's almost like part of me forgot that all of that happened. So just sitting there going through my thoughts and like asking myself these questions like, what is it that I'm looking for in other men? Like, why is it that I keep reaching out to other men? Why is it that I keep talking to other men? Because what is it about this? And that was like my realization was I didn't feel safe in our relationship physically um to just want you.
Yeah. And hearing all that, it was my it was the first time, and I celebrated this with my men's group. It was the first time I was able to hold space without being reactive in our relationship. I
No, I was like, you had done it a few times, but this was, yeah,
like a big topic.
abortion
Oh
was
yeah,
one too.
I guess,
It
but
wasn't the first
maybe I didn't
time.
see it in that level. But like being able to just listen and understand and hear her pain, and I just held it. It was uncomfortable, and I just breathed through it, and it allowed us to connect deeper. Like when you don't allow those things to take up the space, like it was my choice, and for the longest time I chose for it to take up space, and I was just present for the moment. I sat there and able to like deeply connect, and then just things have been like really good ever since. And like when I say really good, like we've been able to live on this. We've taken responsibility for our actions. We've talked. We leaning in with transparent communication, even in the most uncomfortable times. And there's still that sometimes the like we or for me, I last November, for a couple months, I was very closed off. And so like it's the awareness, bringing awareness and being able to like, oh shit, like that's not where I want to be at, and shifting. So understanding how this is, affected our relationship, and I'm very thankful or grateful in listening to her. Not only have I had some breakthroughs for myself, but like her having breakthroughs too, and not knowing, not knowing that that was something that was a layer that was holding, pushing her, not pushing her away, but keeping her from reaching her highest self. And so it's just been a fun journey on that.
Yeah. And a big part of that is also I'm not saying that, people aren't polyamorous or don't want to love many or anything like that. But usually when things are happening like that, we have to be willing to look within and like really ask ourselves those hard questions like why? Like why is one person not enough? Or what is it that you're exactly looking for? And how could you cultivate that within a marriage or within a relationship? Because once again, a lot of times if you're just not in awareness of what it is that you need and you're not sitting with your own thoughts and your own needs and wants, it's hard to pinpoint it. Like it took me years to figure out like, oh, this is what I wanted. Like, this is what I was missing, this whole time. And even knowing that it's possible. If you don't experience it, how can you even know that it's possible? It's like now I can say like we have soul connecting, mind blowing sex where, in the beginning, like we're thinking that we're having like amazing sex and it's like
Yeah.
not even close. Um, but it's like if you've never experienced that, you don't know what that looks like because all you know is porn and whatever you've seen in movies and when you hear your girlfriends talk about, and how could you know how much deeper it could be? And that connection. And I can honestly say like everything ever since things have been good, like I've had no urges or wants to talk to any other guys in that way or seek out those people or relationships again. Like there's just been no need, no urge for it. And it took a while, like even after I told him all this, like there was times where it would come up for me and I would tell him. Like and this is the part of being like 100% absolutely honest and taking responsibility and keeping those walls down is being able to tell your spouse like, hey, right now I'm having an urge to talk to another guy or, like I'm thinking about having sex with other men and I don't know why, but I just want you to know that. And, like it's uncomfortable to like, well, I shouldn't have to tell him all my thoughts, but I see those thoughts as the bricks that start building walls in relationships. And it's like the more that we keep those bricks, we keep taking them down, then the wall never builds. But if we just keep withholding and withholding and withholding these thoughts, then you start building a wall. And then you feel like, hey, why is it that like something feels amiss? Like something doesn't feel right. And you don't know what it is. It's like, well, because you've had 1,000 thoughts about this and you haven't cared once to tell the person. And it's just being able to say like it's a thought. I have no intention of acting on it, but I want you to know like this thought came up right now. And if you're having the thought, there's usually a reason for that too. So then that gives both of you the space to be like, okay, why did the thought come up for me? And then he can check in with himself. Is like, okay, why would she be having that thought right now? It's like, am I out of integrity with myself right now? Is there something that I need to be working on for me? And we both then would have that conversation and ask ourselves those questions. And maybe, it's just about bringing fun into the relationship. Maybe he hasn't been dedicating time to himself and like work doing all his things that make him happy. And because you sense his unhappiness or his lack of direction, now that kind of comes over. It's that whole your cup, his cup, the relationship cup.
Yeah.
So and really that's what it comes back to is like, are you filling your own cup, your own happiness? Is he doing the same? So now you're both able to do that within the relationship. So once again, like the honesty part and just that candor of sharing all your thoughts, sharing all your feelings, sharing all your emotions, whether they seem weird or hard or difficult, it is what keeps the relationship flowing. Like that's what keeps things flowing. It's like think about it as a wall, as a river. It's like you can stack the stones and make the water flow stop, or you can keep moving them so the water keeps flowing and everything keeps moving and everything feels great.
Yeah. And I do know that like your thoughts previously when you would have these thoughts, I didn't understand that it was just thoughts. I
Yeah.
thought that they were action, like that she wanted to. And so oftentimes I was very like as soon as she said it, I get reactive. I
Yeah,
close
because I
down.
mean there was times I tried to have these conversations with him and it
Yeah.
was just like not happening. And I'm like, okay, so I can't tell you what I'm feeling, what I'm thinking, because it's like I did it. Like I
Yeah.
committed the crime. And I was like, I'm telling you I'm having a
Yeah.
thought. And like just a quick like little fact, they say everyone has, and this topic has nothing to do with it, but the point here is like everyone has like suicidal thoughts. They're like every single person. They're like if you're standing on the top of the bridge looking down, and this was from the Andrew Huberman podcast that I
Yeah.
heard it on. He's like, everyone's gonna have that thought of should I jump? And he's like, there's nothing wrong with having these thoughts. It's a matter of are you gonna act on it? Are you going to jump? And that's when you know that obviously there's a problem. And that's my point here is like you having the thought of I saw a guy who looked very attractive, and I kind of want to talk to him, or I want to have sex with him, or I want to make out with him. It's like it's just a thought. Now, if you go and act on it, then there's something deeper. But being able to say that to your spouse without, it causing an uproar is how you keep shit open. And by no means am I like having thoughts of having sex with guys that I see on the street, but it's, if you are, it's a start. It's where you can open up that door to start having these conversations, and start with small stuff. Like it could just be like, hey, when you walked in the room, I had a thought of this. Like, hey, when you didn't do this, like this was my thought. And just having these small conversations, and slowly then the bigger stuff will start coming out.
I think I want to throw this in there because this was a big piece too. I don't remember exact timeline, but when I started understanding the masculine and feminine essence piece and how that played into things, like a lot of times, specifically on the male side, is like when you're in the room with a very attractive woman, or this deep feminine essence, like you're like, damn, like you're having these thoughts and you're objectifying, because that's what we're conditioned as. But what the piece that it really like opened my eyes was like, holy crap, being able to take that energy, that essence that the feminine is providing, and use that as a creative aspect and bring it into your body. Because I mean, I can't speak for her, but like there's been times where I come in contact with these women and I'm like, holy crap, she's fine. Like I feel like my heart fluttering a little bit. And as I read a book by David Dita, I realized that that's the masculine and feminine energy, the polarity piece, and that it's not, we don't just receive that, you get married and like that's the only person you can receive it from. You receive that from everybody, but oftentimes we
Mistake
that for sexual connection, and so we just want to, that's how we have been conditioned to, like, oh yep, it's time to have sex,
and understand that this is literally ingrained in us from our animalistic brain of that, attraction and make babies kind of thing. Like it goes back to our animal brains of, a woman walks in and she looks good, your penis is like, I must make a baby. So once again, like, don't feel bad that this is happening, but be in awareness of why it's happening, and then you can check back in and say, okay, I don't need to make a baby right now, like calm down.
Yeah, well, I mean, I say all that too,
I don't need to reproduce,
because I was like objectifying women.
Yeah.
And like even you, like I was objectifying you, and it was more of just like, I see this, let me take a bite out of it. But I was taking the humanistic factor out of it, and the deeply connecting. And that's how I lived for a majority of our relationship, was like, just let me objectify, like, and because I was watching a lot of porn, like this is how the sexual experience
and if you
should
still
be.
watch porn, you're ruining all your relationships, like all of them, because you're essentially brainwashing yourself to think that that is what relationships look like. And I don't care if you're like, well, I don't really think it's like that, but your brain really thinks it's like that. So you need to stop.
So just to close that loop, like, it's like you're programming yourself, like watching and oftentimes a lot, when I ask men that I work with or have conversations with, and we talk about like experiences, and then I'm like, are you watching porn?
Yeah.
And I'm like, oh yeah.
If you feel like you lack intimacy, like you've never been super close to a woman or a man, like there's something missing, that you want to go a deeper level, and you are a avid user of porn, or even an occasional user of porn, that is probably one of your huge pivotal points, is to stop. And you will realize that over time you will learn how to cultivate that intimacy and that relationship and those things that you're looking for. But if you're still attached to it and you don't let it go, you're not going to get to the other side of what you want.
Yeah. And I just want to go back to the understanding the thoughts that come up, right? Like we always have a choice, but like being able to be curious on how we, like, why is this coming up and how can I learn from this? And a big piece of like my sexual, like I've always, I don't want to say high libido, but I've always been like craving sex, and I was using that as a coping mechanism for connection, for attachment. and understanding that, like, and I'm not shaming that by any means, but just bringing that into my awareness. And when I am asking, hey, like, can we have sex, or can we have quickie, or whatever the case may be, and I'm doing that often, like, where am I not meeting myself? And it's been a good indicator for me in that sense, because when I'm not meeting, like when I've felt empty inside, even, in the last year, I'm not being able to show up the way I want to with her. And even our sexual experiences are not as spicy as I say spicy, but not as like intense as like passionate. There we go. Thanks. Um, as like other experiences. And I've also come to realize that every sexual experience is a different experience, like not to compare. So like even in like the passionate sex that we had and a couple days ago, maybe completely it's going to be different than today or tomorrow. And yes, I'm speaking that into existence.
So if you stuck
fun.
around this long, thanks. I feel like Alex is just rambling now. So
yeah, let me close with this. There's a lot of sharing on her. I did a lot of flirting. I crossed a lot of boundaries. Oftentimes I was getting my validation and my what I was missing from my success in the Navy. And early on in our relationship, where a lot of the problems were, I was flirting a lot with women. I crossed boundaries, and she mentioned it to me oftentimes. So I don't want this to be like a podcast just Sales airing her laundry. It's not that any means.
I mean, I am.
Yeah.
That's okay. I'd rather air my laundry than hide it.
And so, there was times where I've crossed boundaries too. And I come back to this time. I'm very grateful that we are able to learn from these experiences, sit with each other, have these uncomfortable conversations, and move forward.
Yeah. On to the future.
And I did have a lot of hesitation on this topic before I've been running from this topic for a few weeks. Just want to say that
I was running from it a few weeks ago, but after last week's podcast, I already had made up my mind that was going to be this week's podcast. And that's why I didn't say anything this morning, because I wanted to see what you were going to choose to be the topic.
And I was trying to run away from it again.
But I was already convinced. I was like, this is today's topic. And
why were you trying to run away from it?
At first?
Yeah.
I mean, it's just uncomfortable to talk about. But honestly, like, part of me now is like, that's not who I am. And I'm not going to let that define me. So, and I'm not going to get scared that other people are going to define me for this either. Like, if you really know me, that that's not who I am. And we all have some dirty shit hiding somewhere. So I'm not going to sit here and pretend I'm perfect. And whoever tries to do that, I'm just going to be like, that's okay. You'll find your dirt someday.
The beginning, the reason why I was running from it, I was creating, and this is just great, as I was creating a story that there was going to be something else that came out, and I was scared.
Like what?
I'm telling you the story I created. Like I would
like that I did something.
Yeah, like another experience, and I'm like, oh, like Jesus Christ! But
no, I really told you everything. Last year.
Well, I'm saying this morning when I sat there and I looked at it, I'm like, well, I've been running from it long enough. There's nothing to run from. It's like I
can't have a kid that you don't know about. They all look like you.
I did make a joke, and just still got very sensitive on this one, but I made a joke a long time ago that like I couldn't even deny the kids because of the toes and the fact that I would say something like that, which is okay. I'm rambling now. Thank you for listening, and we'll see you next time.
Bye.